Let's try to think about all those times when we realize we've read some information, or even partially studied it some time ago, but we no longer remember it. Why? How does memory work? To greatly simplify for the purposes of our discussion, we can say that the memories we store, including the concepts we learn, do not remain unchanged over time. They change, weakening or disappearing if they are not recalled, if they ultimately prove to be of no use over time. On the contrary, every time we recall a piece of information, it is reconstructed and modified, creating new connections, becoming more solid within our memory, and turning into lasting learning. The effectiveness of retrieval practice lies precisely in the recall process, which pushes our mind to refresh and consolidate memories. It is the subject of various studies and can be used both to reinforce knowledge and skills acquired over time and to identify gaps that have formed as a result of memorization processes. This last point is very important. After several study sessions, it's not uncommon to see inaccurate self-assessments or negative evaluations received by students after an exam. Why? Because students often base their learning process on repeated reading without testing themselves. By rereading, they experience a sense of familiarity that they mistake for actually knowing the material. The practice of retrieval, on the other hand, requires students to test themselves, to recall the concepts they've learned without first rereading or reviewing the material. This supports accurate self-assessment by improving their correct perception of their own level of preparation. But what retrieval strategies could teachers suggest to students? The most effective retrieval activities are those that require a more intense effort to recall information, starting from minimal prompts. For example, it can be helpful to ask students to summarize the concepts they can remember by explaining them to a peer, or to create concept maps, draw processes from memory, and so on. A quick method that can be managed with automated tools is the use of hybrid tests, which consist of open-ended questions followed by multiple-choice questions. These offer a dual advantage. The open-ended question stimulates a response based on minimal input. Through the multiple-choice question, they offer the possibility to respond, thus recalling knowledge, even for those who are unable to remember the concepts precisely. The use of hybrid tests is an interesting strategy because it can also be implemented in large classes, thanks to tools like student response systems. It requires a relatively limited amount of time and, if desired, allows for the delivery of automatic yet rich feedback to the entire class. In summary, with hybrid tests, students recall the information they've acquired, test themselves, register the correct information, and through rich feedback also receive guidance on how to improve their study process. Retrieval strategies can be varied and even very simple, as we have seen. What's important, both for the student and the teacher, is to activate this process as frequently as possible. To encourage active participation in retrieval activities by students, the teacher might even consider incorporating this activity into the assessment process, even if only by offering a small bonus to the grade. For example, an extra point on the exam in exchange for participation.